when I was telling my friends that I was interviewing Grant Snider, a few of them were like, "Who's Grant Snider?" And then I showed them, an incidental comic. I was like, "Oh, that guy, he's cool."
That's
So
great because I think that's every cartoonist's dream is to have your signature be not the name at the bottom, but to be your style and your method of drawing and the way your characters look and move. If somebody can look at it and say, "Oh, that's by that artist," you don't even need to sign your name on it. That's I think the highest compliment.
welcome back to the Comics Cube, everyone. Today I am with Grant Snider, the creator of Incidental Comics. Hi, Grant. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing okay. Is the pandemic okay over there?
Yeah, things are crazy, but it feels like a normal sort of crazy now for what that's worth.
What they call the new normal.
The new normal or something.
I've been a fan of yours for the longest time, and to be honest, I can't really explain it because as a fan, my bias tends to be towards the more superhero-y, realistic art. But there's a real charm in your work, in your cartooning, and I was wondering what inspired you to get into comics, and what made you develop that kind of style.
Yeah, thanks. I think maybe I'm the rare cartoonist comic creator who didn't grow up reading superhero comics. They just were never on my radar. Not that I didn't like him or anything. I just never had that exposure. But early on, I was reading like newspaper comic strips, Calvin and Hobbes. I think anyone in my generation, you ask their favorite comic strip, Bill Watterson's Calvin and Hobbes is up there. Um,
Yeah.
and I would steal my dad's, comic books and read them. These were kind of like alternative weekly comics from the 1980s, 70s. Stuff that was a little bit age inappropriate for me at the as a teen or preteen, but I still got a kick out of reading those. And so basically, I always had this love of comics, but it wasn't until college when I decided, hey, I like to draw, I like to read and write. I haven't quite found that artistic thing that combines all the things I like to do. Maybe comics is it.
Hmm.
And looking back, I mean, I should have done it 10 years sooner, but uh, started drawing a weekly comic strip and just kept doing it. And, here I am uh, over a decade after I started that weekly strip, and it's still going.
Incidental comics. What in one of the things that really sets incidental comics apart is the fact that you can actually remove the art and the words would still stand on its own, or vice versa.
Really interesting. I've never tried it.
Uh, yeah, like for example, the nature of ambition. I think I've
Mhm.
actually read that out loud to people at some point,
That's
without
cool.
actually showing them. Do you come up
Yeah.
with the words first, or the art first, or is it a synthesis?
So when it works best, it's all kind of together.
Hmm.
There'll be like a fully formed idea in the sketchbook, which is like a really rough doodle that looks like, my 6-year-old drew it with some scribbled words that maybe I can go back and read, or maybe I can't even see what I was saying. But when the idea comes as both words and pictures at once, like I'm pretty sure did with that Nature of Ambition comic, that's when everything clicks into place. That's kind of rare. I would say it's like every few months or a couple of times a year I'll draw that comic where it just happens. And it's like I don't have to put much work into it. There's the idea in the sketchbook. I look at it a few days or weeks or months later, and it's like, hey, it's there. I can now draw it out. Usually it's like, hey, I have this kind of random idea. It's a picture right now. I don't really have words to go with it. I can draw a series of images and kind of grasp what the comic might look like, and then I'll try to layer the words over it. It won't really work. I'll try some new words. They'll sort of work a little bit better. I'll end up changing the pictures. And so they all go through a bunch of revisions, and who knows which came first, really. Um, I don't know if that answered your question,
Yeah.
but
Going back a little bit to your influences, I've had a few people on the show who've all said the same thing about Calvin and Hobbes. You can't be of a certain age and not be influenced by Calvin and Hobbes, even if you didn't read Calvin and Hobbes. Because
oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
whoever you're influenced by ends up being influenced by Calvin and Hobbes.
Right, right.
So
That's interesting.
Do you have any, like, what are your other artistic influences, whether or not it's from comics?
So a big one for me was New Yorker cartoons. Um, the single panel gag cartoons. A lot of times there's a sort of boring setup of a guy in a business suit, saying something clever in a written caption. Um, and I actually tried my hand at drawing these, New Yorker style cartoons for a little bit, not so long ago, and they were just the worst thing you've ever seen. They weren't funny. They had no life to them. So I realized that's not quite my my area of what works for me. But I still love reading them. I have some old like garage sale finds of like cartoons from the 50s and 60s that has kind of the old fashioned style New Yorker cartoon, but also some like really I would consider still relevant work like by Saul Steinberg and these various other really awesome artists, Charles Adams, and so I think copying some of the language, if not actually the humor style and stuff, was pretty important to me. And I think if you look through my comics, you'll see, oh, okay, I can see how that's inspired by some New Yorker artists. Roz Chast is one of the most famous artists working for them right now, and she's been in their pages for decades. But I think her work was what really actually got me inspired to draw more personal stuff. I've been drawing like political humor or like campus humor, stuff that is nice, but you kind of forget about it a couple of days later. When I saw Roz Chast art, I was like, oh man, that's somebody who's taking like the weird side of her personality, funneling into her drawings, and coming up with these really amazing results.
It's interesting for somebody who was inspired by New Yorker cartoons and therefore reading, political cartoons. You don't have a lot of politics in incidental comics, and that's on by
Yeah,
design, right?
I don't know if by design, but just by what I naturally what naturally interests me. So like anyone else, I mean, I can't ignore the news that's all over my phone and Twitter and stuff, but I feel like my reaction to it is just to get like angry and frustrated. And whenever I've tried to draw more like cynical type drawing, cynical type comic, it doesn't come out how I want it to. It doesn't, I like there to be a kernel of hope, and I don't know if I can necessarily always find that in politics. So finding that hopefulness or that humanity, I think, has veered me well away from that.
Speaking of a kernel of hope, I just want to point out that Disclaimer is a comic that I've used at work as a team building exercise.
Oh, that's cool. What kind of work do you do?
Well, this is from my old job. I did
Yeah.
I'm in research. I'm in market research, but for my
Uh-huh.
old job, I just needed something to motivate everyone. So I took Disclaimer and I pasted it on their cubicles. And then they were asking what was up with that, and I basically said, well, what is the answer to the last question? Can you be everything you want to be? And I don't know if this is what you intended. And then they said, well, the answer is no. And then I said, why? And they just say it up here. Like, these are the reasons. And I go, what if the answer is yes? Then what do those things become? And they're like, oh, they become excuses. Like, I don't know if that's what you intended, but I thought that was really inspiring. So you
I
can,
love that story. That's awesome. Yeah.
yeah.
And I think when I drew it, thinking back, it's probably about 2012 or so. I was struggling with the same thing because like I have my interest is not just drawing. Obviously, it's writing, which shows through in the like you said the writing side of the comics. It's I have this more like scientific side of my brain, which got me into dentistry. I work as an orthodontist. Didn't that was not quite the path of the time. And I have all these other things. And I'm like, man, I would love to do this and do this and do this. And it was kind of weighing at me because I think it was knee deep in my dental school textbooks and like studying, 40 plus hours a week and just immersed in that thing. And I was worried that somehow this passion of cartooning and comics that I worked for only a few years really to develop, so it's still pretty new. I was worried that it might just fall by the wayside. Um, and obviously it didn't. These
Wow.
grew simultaneously, yeah. Um, and then the other aspect of it was more like looking at my personal life. Is this all possible and still having a family? So fast forward to right now, 2020. I'm stuck at home with my wife and 4 kids, working what I consider 2.5 jobs. My job as an orthodontist, my job doing incidental comics, if you can call it a job, and then the new avenue I've been into, which is writing and illustrating children's picture books.
Mm-hmm.
So Yeah, I think looking back at it, the answer is now yes, but I didn't know it at the time.
That's so that comic is about you and Incidental Comics too. So
Exactly. Yeah. They're all
that
very self-referential.
that makes it really cool for me, and like even cooler. That's my favorite. That's my favorite strip of yours. That one and The Nature of Ambition. Those two are
Yeah.
my two
Those are,
favorites.
those are,
Um, yeah. Does The Nature of Ambition have anything to do with Incidental Comics too?
yeah. And this is more of like a week to week struggle versus like this big existential struggle of, okay, what are you going to do for your career and your life and things. But it's more just the this is my kind of interpretation. I don't think that everyone who reads it should say, oh, well, this is what it means. I think, it can be spun in various ways based on how you read it. But what I was thinking about when I drew that, or looking back on it, is I get pretty wrapped up in the external things of making my art. If whenever I post a comic, it goes straight to Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or whatever social media platform is going to be there 5, 10 years from now. And I can see, okay, well, this many people liked it, this many people shared it. These people are commenting this, they like it, they don't like it. Maybe I'll sell some books or sell some posters. And no matter what, if you're creating stuff and putting it out in the world, you're going to get wrapped up a little bit in the external part of it. And I think you can kind of get swept away by it. Like, if, when your YouTube channel takes off with 100,000 subscribers, are you going to have the same focus as when you started out and stuff? Like, I don't know. But when I do my best work is when I block out all that other stuff, just sit with my sketchbook, think only about the work itself and not like why I'm doing it or what result it might get or what, fame and fortune or lack thereof it might bring me.
Yeah, I was going to say, once again, The Nature of Ambition is a comic that means a lot to me because that came out at a time when my website was just getting off the ground, and I was getting all of these things like, oh, please review my comic, please review my comic. And
Yeah.
and eventually I was like, wait, stop it, stop. I just want to, I didn't start this for that.
You just want to write about comics, right?
I just want to write about comics. I didn't do it so that people could give me free stuff. You can't review free things anyway because you can't really say
Oh,
if it's
really?
worth the money. For me, like
I see. Yeah.
I can't tell you if it's worth the money if I got it for free.
Yeah.
So
That makes sense.
let's talk about the you know what do I want to call it? The clever side, the clever. I mean, it's all clever, but the clever side to incidental comics, which is for example, when you talk about things like when you have one of those structures. I'm looking right here, like at the inferiority complex.
Yeah.
You basically draw like just one picture, and it's it's a structure, and then you basically label things. You label a ladder with ladders of success. You label the room under the observatory with indecision room. Uh,
Mhm.
you label the castle with overcompensating facade. Like, how do you
Yeah.
come up with this stuff?
So comics are great because they're very sequential and you put words in boxes one after another. But sometimes I just feel the need to break out of that, refined structure and just draw a scene that everything's matched together. And so I think that comes from like reading like Where's Waldo books as a kid, or I guess it's Where's Wally outside the United States, maybe. Um,
It's Waldo here. So
Although, yeah, I think the British was maybe Where's Wally originally. Anyway, so those huge scenes where like you have to pick out little tiny details, and I remember as a kid just looking at those books and just like being lost in the pages. And then I was referencing some of those like alternative comics that I found from my dad's bookshelf. Um, Matt Groening, who drew the comic strip Life in Hell, actually he may still draw it. I don't know. Anyway, he's famous for The Simpsons, much more so than Life in Hell. But he has these amazing scenes of like his rabbit-like characters walking through like the childhood block, and you have to escape the mean bullies and the kid with the BB gun and the dead dog on the side of the road. Um, and then he has one called Bongo's Dream House, which is basically just the character's house. He's thinking, okay, I want this fish tank and this swimming pool and this car and this rocket ship, etc. So I think when I draw those comics, I'm trying to get back to that space as a kid where I'm just looking at and staring at this page and and just getting lost in it. And so to build that, you have to kind of start with like a structure, whether it's like a building or a big scene, like a fair or something like that. And then I just try to fill it with little jokes and visual gags all throughout. And sometimes it turns into a big mess and it's, unreadable, but when they work, it's a nice, you know, I guess menagerie of different, like 50 different comic ideas thrown into one panel.
You do a weekly. You do Incidental Comics weekly.
Weekly.
How much do we not see?
Unfortunately, everything I finish, I post. So
Okay.
um, I wish I had this like vast trove of like unpublished work that I could, die after a long career, and then they keep publishing all these books posthumously. But that's not the case. I have a bunch of stuff in my sketchbook, but it's all like drawing on site or like, just very personal stuff that's not refined enough to publish or anything. So basically, if I take the time and sit down with it and draw it next week or next month, or at the very latest a couple months from now, it's going to be on my website and on the internet.
You have a comic out right now called Decluttering. It's your latest one. And it's about kind of throwing things away and then making sure that you're included in it. And I kind of feel that that's not the first time you've done it, or even the second time you've done that kind of theme. Is that something that you have to constantly remind yourself?
To clean my house now. Yeah, there's actually another one of the big scenes in a comic called the Interior Life has the same image of the character opening the door, and it just stuff upon stuff tumbles out. Um, and so in a couple ways, yeah, because my wife and I we have a little bit of the hoarding tendency. For me, it's the books you see behind me, and it's like kids' clothes and toys that we've accumulated over the years with our children, and just can't seem to get rid of. So it's true in like that physical sense, but also in the sense of like when I go to like change all these aspects of my life externally, I rarely ever get to the point where I'm actually changing me. I'm changing. Oh, well, I'm going to make my house clean. I'm going to make my desk, my workspace nice. I'm going to do all these things to look better. But am I really changing the root of me as a person? And I think the answer is almost always no.
You have, you have The Shape of Ideas, which, by the way, I love the cover.
Oh, thanks.
You have The Shape of Ideas, and you also have I Will Judge You by Your Bookshelf. So that one is incidental comics, but very specifically about bookshelves and books.
Right.
You've got enough of those. So basically, what that says to me is that you do judge people by their bookshelves. You do take a look at bookshelves and see,
I'm trying to look
classify
behind you
them.
right now and see if I can recognize anything. And
Uh, there's a
unfortunately,
lot of there's a lot of Karl Barks and Don Rosa stuff over there. That's
nice.
this is Calvin and Hobbes,
Oh yeah, yeah, the treasury, the complete Calvin and Hobbes, very
the
nice.
complete Calvin and Hobbes. Yeah.
You're judged favorably. Good.
Like I kind of wish it had a nicer looking spine so that when I do these shows, people are like, oh, it's Calvin and Hobbes.
all color coordinated and stuff, right?
Yeah. So you do like when I guess when you do look at people's bookshelves, you do kind of classify them, and then what kind of bookshelves? Like, how do you look at somebody's bookshelf? Like
Usually, I'm like pre-pandemic when I had friends that went over to their houses and things. I'd go over and like I'd feel like inferior because um, I feel like the thick books I have are ones I had to buy for a college class and I haven't read since. Where these people, I'm thinking of a couple friends in particular, have like classics of literature that they've actually read. I think one friend of mine had like 7 copies in various different translations of Dante's Divine Comedy. Hope I'm saying the name of the book right. Anyway, so I see these people and it's like, man, their education, their depth of the literature they've read is vastly exceeding mine. I have like a lot of kids' books, lots of books with pictures, fair share of comics. If there's a novel back there, I've either not read it or only read it once. Um, so yeah, it comes back to me feeling a little bit judged when I actually end up doing the judging myself.
And then so you have that book, and it's all about one theme. Or are there plans to put together more books based on different themes around incidental comics?
Yeah, there's a plan for another one, which I'll probably wrap up doing the actual work for it in early or middle of next year, which is broadly on mindfulness, um,
Mm.
which I kind of signed it up on mindfulness before I actually knew the depth of what that word meant. So now I'm having to do a bunch of reading and research and stuff, and making sure I know, hey, if I'm going to call my book a book about mindfulness, how do I make it a little more specific to that theme? But the reason we chose that is my editor Charlie Kochman and I were looking at ways to organize the comics. So with the first one, I had a whole bunch on creativity for the Shape of Ideas. So it made sense. Hey, let's do one in general about creativity. Um, Finally, we had enough on books, for my comics for the New York Times Book Review to collect and to do this bookshelf one. And I couldn't really figure out what the next book would be about. I have all these random, like almost poetry type comics. I have a lot of comics about like walking around in nature, looking at things, which doesn't seem to have connect with anything except my personal life. And then I'm still doing a bunch, similar to like the Nature of Ambition or Disclaimer,
Mhm.
that are more about like the creative side or like the idea side of things. So I realized I could sort of shoehorn them all into this idea of mindfulness, which is looking externally and being focused on the world around you, but also looking inward and thinking, okay, how is my brain working? How am I relating to the world? And you know, so I get to it's fun because I get to look really deep within myself and do the hugely self-referential comics, but I can also include ones that are just like me lying in the backyard on a blanket, looking up at the sky and the trees and birds and something, and feeling like a true poet.
I'm surprised at a couple of things, which is
Yeah,
the first book, The Shape of Ideas, is very specifically about the strips about creativity, because that's kind of how I see your strip in general. So
yeah.
I actually was under the impression that this was just a best of your strip, like a best of collection. So
It basically is, yeah, yeah. So all the organization and the planning was done after the fact. So um, I hope I'm not revealing any deep trade secrets of how my how the books are made, but I have 5 or 10 years of comics on various different themes that I draw weekly without any big plan in mind, and then we collect them and try to organize them in a way that makes it like seem, oh, like maybe they sort of intended to put these ones together in a coherent way. So, and I think when I do the horrible author thing of going on and reading like reviews, don't ever do that. It's like, well, these are just all like thrown together. Like I saw somebody post about the bookshelf one. Well, it's like half of them's about a reading and half's about writing, and it doesn't really make a through line. I'm like, well, that's true because that's exactly how I made it. So in a way, you're right. Every comic or every book has been like a greatest hits of the incidental comics.
I gotta say, anybody who gives your collections a bad review, it just doesn't make sense to me. It's just it's just I mean, giving bad reviews in general to me is like, you don't have to read it, guys.
Yeah.
But
If there's a book I didn't finish, I mean, at very least, like on Goodreads, I've given like 3 stars to ones I finished and really thought was okay. I didn't care for it, but I finished it. I don't think I've ever given a 2 star or 1 star out of 5 review because that just seems kind of cruel. I mean, authors are very sensitive people, myself included. Like, um, I think reading a really bad review in like a place of importance, I think could really set you off on a negative spiral for a week or more.
oh wow. Yeah, that's just mean. And it's also like not everything works for the same people.
Right. Yeah.
Uh,
That's, I mean, I do think critics should be, if a book's bad, including my book, certainly critics should have the right to tear it apart, but just don't show me the article after you've written that.
yeah, the worst one is when they write an article and they tag the author.
They tag you. Yeah. Just take off the tag. I think I was going down that rabbit hole on Twitter. This is years back. I think this is literally like 5 or 8 years ago. And it said, sadly, I think I'll have to unfollow Grant Snider's incidental comics. Let's face it, he lost it. And I want to like just tweet at that guy, hey, 10 years from now, I'm still doing it, buddy. No. It was
uh,
probably my high school classmates or something. I don't know.
so and then the other thing I was surprised by is that you have to think about mindfulness, which is just something from reading your work that I thought you already had, which is I guess why you're doing
Yeah,
collection?
I mean, just I think there's various definitions of mindfulness, but I can get inspired by reading different books. Like some will come at it from like a meditation aspect. I don't really have any meditation practice at all, so that's interesting to read more of that. Some come at it from like more of like the psychology and you know, scientific research type aspect, and others it's more like pure poetry. So all of them give a little bit different take on it that I think is can be inspiring for the comics.
Okay. And moving on, how did you come to make the children's books? What sound is morning and what color is night?
I've always had that like itch in the in the back of my creative brain to like do something a little bit longer form. Um, and I've done long comics, but you can only do a certain amount of length in a comic that you're going to post online, because if it gets too long, people just won't read it unless you're serializing something. Um, I've always had that love for children's picture books along with comics themselves. And so when I had kids, I knew like, hey, this is something I really want to do. I didn't realize it would actually be like 10 times harder and take twice as long as I thought it would. Um, and so those were two fun books to do. I got to incorporate some of the same like mindfulness type activities that I'm doing for my current comics. So it's like a natural extension of those, but I feel like I'm still just like a beginner at it, which is fun. So if you told me to sit down and draw an incidental comic, I could probably have something that looks like one of my strips done in about an hour if I really had to, if I was being forced to. But if you sat down and told me to do a kid's picture book, I wouldn't know where to start, and I'd have to really dive deep into it. So just having that beginner's mindset again and feeling like, hey, this is something I'm learning. This is something I can try all these new things and not really know if what I'm going to do is going to work or not. That's hugely thrilling, because after you draw comics for like 10 years, you certainly have an idea of what works and what doesn't work, and what experiment might be worth your time and what might not be,
Mhm.
which takes some of that creative thrill out of it. Picture books, it's all a creative thrill right now.
And my last question is, the you of all the people I've interviewed and will interview after this, I'm going to bet anything that you're the one who goes viral the most. What does that feel like, knowing that your work gets shared around so much, but it doesn't necessarily always lead to people liking the page Incidental Comics or subscribing or whatever. You just know that it's being shared, and then at some point another of your steps will be shared again.
It
Is
kind
that
of keeps me doing it. So like when I first started being a cartoonist, I had the idea, well, hey, if I get my strip published, I'm going to have like maybe, you know, 5 or 10,000 people see it in my local newspaper, and it's going to be on every doorstep, or at least in the little bins of newspapers that you can get out and see what concerts are playing and stuff. So I had kind of these small ambitions of like, oh, a bunch of people are going to read my comics, and then newspapers kind of fizzled out and the internet took off around the time Incidental Comics was coming of age, I would say. And all of a sudden I was like, wow, I can have that many people see it like literally 5 minutes after I post it. So I just think it's really cool, and I have to keep reminding myself how awesome that is, and how like even 20 years ago cartoonists could never have that much exposure. You could never just publish your comic and have somebody in India or Indonesia or something see it, literally seconds after you posted it. So no matter if those readers even recognize, hey, that's Grant Snider of Incidental Comics doing it, maybe if they just read it and share it and, you know, take off the tag of my name on there, and and it ends up being turned into a meme that doesn't even resemble the original. I still think that's all awesome and all good for the nature of creativity.
Yeah, that's really cool, because when I was telling my friends that I was interviewing Grant Snider, a few of them were like, "Who's Grant Snider?" And then I showed them, an Incidental Comic. I was like, "Oh, that guy, he's cool."
That's
So
great, because yeah, I think that's every cartoonist's dream, is to have your signature be not the name at the bottom, but to be your style and your method of drawing and the way your characters look and move. If somebody can look at it and say, "Oh, that's by that artist," you don't even need to sign your name on it. That's I think the highest compliment.
I don't think your style can be replicated either. Like if somebody wanted to try it, because it's kind of like Charles Schultz. Like all you got squiggly lines, when you're drawing people? Like, I don't think somebody can draw like you and make it look exactly like you.
Hopefully that's because I've copied off of enough people. So like when I think like if I could assemble, if I had to like make a robot that drew like me, I know I would put like, okay, I'll have a little bit of Roz Chast here, a little bit of Matt Groening here, who I mentioned, quite a bit of Tom Gauld, who's a British cartoonist who draws bookish type comics like I do, and who I learned a lot from studying his work. And then a little bit of JJ Sempe, the French cartoonist who has that really like loose line, maybe some Quentin Blake. So if you put those all in a blender, you'd have this concoction that looks just like it. But hopefully people pick up on those references a little bit when they read it without
Mhm.
saying, hey, his work just looks just like, this person's.
Here's my real last question. So you started out wanting to be a newspaper, a newspaper cartoonist.
Yeah.
The freedom that the internet has given you in terms of size and layout, is it freeing? Is it confining in terms of there's too much freedom? Do you prefer it, or do you
The
prefer the
answer is yes to
constraints?
all of those questions.
Okay.
Yeah. It's both freeing and confining. The latest thing has been trying to get like it to read on a phone screen. So like Instagram's cool because if you want to do a multi-panel strip, somebody can flip through it, and you can see like up to 10 images at once. If I put that on Facebook, it doesn't have the same effect, or put it on Twitter, somebody's going to have to click through a bunch of things and it's not quite as organic. So I have to like, it's like a design challenge every time. Okay, if I have this small idea, I have to make it striking enough that somebody's going to want to, scrolling through the phone screen, look at that and read the whole thing and maybe squint a little bit. Or if it's long enough, I have to condense it enough that somebody can either flip through Instagram or it can be mashed up on Twitter and Facebook to look as one image. So it's one of those constraints that like can just be really frustrating at times. But I think the fact that you have to put it on a phone screen on these different platforms makes it so you're forced to edit a lot. You're forced to do a lot different work than you would do otherwise. Um, and who knows, maybe there'll be a way to share a lot more long form stuff in the future. Maybe they'll just get smaller and smaller till the only thing you can ever see on your phone is like a one panel 5-word comic strip, and then I'll have to adapt. But it's a cool challenge, and luckily I still have the books to fall back on if it didn't quite work on the phone screen.
Yeah. On top of all that, I was gonna say you have to make sure that it looks good when it's finally printed in a conventional, uh, dimensions of a book.
Right, if it
Yeah.
ever gets there. Right? So I do design, coming from that old school cartooning mindset, I design with a page in mind. And then I think, okay, can this page be squeezed down to, a micro size on a phone and be read that way? And when it works great. When it doesn't, it might not get as many likes or anything, but it's something to learn from still and to build on in that way.
Do you have anything else you want to plug?
That's all. No, I'm just hard at work on picture books in the next Incidental Comics collection, and hope people continue to enjoy reading them weekly. And I'll do it for as long as I have hands to draw for.
Thank you, Grant. This was great. I've been a big fan of yours for around 10 years at this point. Um, yeah. So thanks, everyone. Grant Snider draws Incidental Comics.
Thanks so much. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.